I'm Emily, 34, and my husband Bob is 27. Although we didn't notice the age gap much during our dating years, it became more apparent once we decided to marry. When I first met his parents, I was struck by their rural home in the Northeast and their deeply conservative views. They were initially very resistant to our relationship because of our age difference. I remember their disapproval vividly, with comments like, "They say an older wife is a rare find, but 7 years is quite a lot. Can Emily even have children at her age? Won't her eggs be too old?" Such remarks could easily alienate most women. While the father-in-law was merely rude, the mother-in-law was outright hostile. She declared, "I refuse to accept this. Why does Bob need to marry someone 7 years older? It's too embarrassing to even discuss with the neighbors. He'll soon be back here to take over the family business. And with your city background, you're simply not suited to be our daughter-in-law." Bob and I had been together for 6 years, and I had devoted nearly all my late 20s to him. I was committed to marrying him, and after living together for a few years, I didn't have the energy to search for someone else. In my frustration, I pushed Bob into proposing, and he reluctantly agreed. Perhaps due to his youth or just his nature, he seemed to prefer keeping things as they were. When his parents opposed our engagement, he quickly shifted his stance, saying, "See, I told you it was too soon to get married. We can just register our marriage later." I responded firmly, "It's not too soon. The age difference will change no matter how much time passes." Turning back to his parents with a polite smile, I said, "Yes, I am older than Bob, but that's something beyond our control. I promise to do my best to prove myself as a worthy daughter-in-law. I'm not perfect, but I hope you can accept me." Though they agreed with some reluctance, Bob's sister was adamantly opposed. At our first meeting, she bluntly declared, "Just so you know, don't refer to me as your sister-in-law. It's completely unacceptable for my brother to marry someone older than me." Looking back, I realized I was naive. Yet, with the confidence of someone who had navigated difficult clients in my work, I believed I could handle it. I now understand what they call bride bullying. I convinced myself that moving back to the countryside to live with the in-laws was not as bad as the horror stories I had read online. I should have called off the wedding at that point, but as they say, hindsight is 20/20. Now, a year later, I deeply regret getting married. Although our daily life and work routines didn't change much after we registered our marriage, one major shift was the frequent phone calls Bob started receiving from his mother. I could only guess what they were about, likely questioning when we moved back home and probably urging him to consider divorce. Whenever Bob received calls from his mother, he would retreat to another room or the bathroom, trying to shield me from overhearing. But with our small apartment, it was impossible not to catch snippets of the conversation. I often heard phrases like, "So Emily was saying," and couldn't help but listen in. It seemed they were accusing me of opposing the idea of moving back to Bob's hometown to live with his parents, but that wasn't true. When I asked Bob about moving back, he had expressed reluctance, saying he didn't want to live somewhere without a nearby convenience store and where job opportunities were scarce. It seemed he was using me as a scapegoat for his own unwillingness to return home. It was frustrating to see Bob cast me as the villain to cover up his own hesitations. Just now, I overheard Bob in the next room saying, "So, if I bring up divorce, I'd have to pay alimony, right?" His hesitation about divorce wasn't rooted in any lingering affection for me, but rather in his aversion to paying alimony. Hearing his true feelings was disheartening. It might be time to seriously consider divorce. Although we don't have children, I began contemplating it privately without mentioning it to anyone. Shortly after, I received a call about Bob's sister's upcoming wedding, prompting us to take the express train back to his family's home for the ceremony. Despite Bob being considered the heir, our wedding had been a modest family dinner, while his sister's wedding was set to be a lavish event. I wanted to fulfill my social obligations and avoid any further fault on our part, despite the disparity. The wedding was scheduled for the middle of a 3-day weekend, so Bob and I arrived at his family's home the day before. Bob's sister's fiancé is from a neighboring city, and the wedding was set to take place at a venue there, with plans for the relatives to travel by chartered bus on the day of the event. As the family home became a hub for relatives, they began arriving in droves. The ceremony was set for just after 2:00 p.m. To avoid overcrowding the venue's dressing rooms, the venue staff, hairdressers and dressers came to the house, and even Bob's parents were getting dressed up. Our own wedding had been more of a simple family dinner, so we wore slightly nicer everyday clothes. The contrast in treatment was stark and surprising. I had changed into the dress I had splurged on for the occasion, done my makeup, and was setting my hair when my father-in-law called out, "Hey Emily, could you serve some refreshments to the relatives waiting?" With a smile, I began handing out refreshments, introducing myself with, "Nice to meet you. I'm Bob's wife. Please enjoy the refreshments," and trying to make my presence felt with the poise of a seasoned TV announcer. Despite my mother-in-law's suggestion to stay in Bob's room, I was eager to fulfill my role and make a good impression. I was determined to make a positive impression. Shortly after, the bus arrived to take us to the wedding venue. The relatives boarded with excitement, and as I prepared to join them, my mother-in-law called out, "Wait a minute, Emily. I forgot the pearl necklace. Could you go get it?" "Really, in this formal dress?" I asked. She insisted, "It's in the drawer on top of the dresser in my room. It's a keepsake from my mother. Please hurry and bring it." "Understood. I'll look for it now," I replied. I hurried to my mother-in-law's room and began searching through the cluttered dresser drawer. The necklace wasn't immediately visible, and with everyone else already on the bus, I started to feel anxious. After about 5 minutes, I found a box that looked promising. I opened it quickly and dashed to the entrance, only to see that the bus had already left. The entire family, including Bob, had departed without me. "You've got to be kidding," I exclaimed, rubbing my eyes in disbelief. The bus was nowhere in sight. I panicked, realizing I'd left my cell phone in my bag, which had already been loaded onto the bus. I knew the venue's name but didn't have the phone number. Without my phone, I couldn't reach Bob, and without my wallet, I couldn't even get a taxi. What was I going to do? For a moment, I felt a wave of despair, but then I thought, do we even need to go to the wedding? My enthusiasm for the event had completely evaporated. It wasn't just my first time meeting the relatives. Surely, my in-laws and Bob must have noticed I wasn't on the bus. Their departure without me seemed unnecessarily cruel. The idea of divorce crossed my mind, but simply ending the marriage seemed too easy. I wanted revenge. After some contemplation, I devised a plan. I stepped outside with a calm demeanor and a smile, preparing to execute my scheme. When the relatives, in-laws, and Bob returned from the wedding around 5:00 p.m., they were visibly drunk. By then, I had gathered all my belongings except for the bag that had gone with them. I found a taxi company's number in a phone book next to the in-laws' home phone and called, requesting a taxi to pick me up in 30 minutes. Everything was set. I greeted them at the bus with an innocent expression. Bob's face showed guilt when he saw me, but he didn't say a word. My in-laws ignored me, preoccupied with sending off the relatives. The relatives glanced my way but left in their cars. I wished Bob would at least offer an apology, but that's just how he was. With a forced smile, I said to Bob, "Welcome back." He looked visibly relieved and began making excuses. "I didn't realize you weren't on the bus. I felt bad, but the ceremony was starting, so I couldn't come back for you." I ignored his excuses and started searching through the luggage for my bag, silently conveying my disbelief. I turned to him and said, "Divorce? Is this some kind of joke? Because it certainly feels like one." When Bob realized what I had said, he began to panic. "Who knows? I'm surprised you think such a petty lie would work. So what if you weren't noticed? Are you saying you forgot I existed until you saw me?" While both of his parents were awful, the real disappointment was Bob. He was left speechless, unable to defend himself. Then my father-in-law, after sending off the relatives, chimed in, "Come on, it was just a little forgetfulness on both sides. Bob's talking about divorce over something like this? City brides are really spineless." It seemed he was actually in favor of the divorce. My mother-in-law, upon hearing about it, smirked and said, "I knew it. A city bride just doesn't fit in. She was never right for our family." Her hypocrisy infuriated me. If that was how they felt, they should have just invited Bob to the wedding alone. Why make me travel all this way only to leave me behind? Anyone would be outraged by such treatment, whether they're a city bride or a country bride. When I shouted, my mother-in-law shouted back, "We never intended to invite you in the first place. There wasn't even a seat prepared for you. Bob brought you along by mistake, so we left you behind." "What?" I was shocked by her audacity. As I glared, Bob quickly looked away and shifted the blame to his mother, saying, "Well, Mom didn't explicitly say to come alone, so I assumed it meant as a couple." My mother-in-law's unreasonable anger continued. "And why did you go around serving tea and introducing yourself as the bride?" At the venue, relatives were asking why the wife didn't show up, not realizing Bob was even married. It made us look foolish. That's your own fault, and it's absurd to say I shouldn't introduce myself, I retorted. It seemed my effort to introduce myself as Bob's wife to the relatives had made an impact. So, you never intended to acknowledge me and planned to divorce me eventually. That's why you kept our wedding a secret from the relatives and made it seem like just a dinner party. Neither my father-in-law nor my mother-in-law responded, but their silence confirmed my suspicions. It was clear to me that severing ties with this family was the right decision. Fine, I'll grant your wish and divorce you. I'm better off without a hostile family and an unreliable husband. I boarded the taxi that had just arrived and took the last train back to my apartment. Unable to sleep that night, I impulsively searched for lawyers online and began packing my belongings. I kept myself busy until dawn. When I finally woke up late the next day, I found several missed calls from Bob and my in-laws. It seemed my revenge had made its mark. After being left behind, I came up with a plan for revenge, but I wanted to keep it within the bounds of safety and legality. I didn't want to just divorce and suffer in silence without making a statement. I recalled how concerned my mother-in-law was about the neighbors' opinions. There was a surplus of refreshments and snacks she had bought for the relatives, so I decided to use them. I bagged up the leftover treats and set out around the neighborhood, greeting everyone with a smile. "Hello, I'm Bob's wife," I announced, and proceeded to share everything about how I had been treated and left behind on the wedding day. That evening, my mother-in-law and I had a loud argument outside. Naturally, the entire neighborhood heard, a perfect form of revenge for a family so worried about their public image. Afterward, Bob and I divorced without any major complications. The stories I shared were framed as casual conversations, so I wasn't sued for defamation. With the help of a lawyer, I was able to claim compensation for the abandonment and secure a satisfactory settlement. As for my sister-in-law, her marriage quickly unraveled. She had concealed her difficult personality to get married, but people rarely change. Her true nature emerged, and the marriage soared rapidly. Within 6 months, she had divorced and moved back to her parents' home. By then, the incident of my abandonment had become a notorious rumor. Eventually, the in-laws gained a reputation as a vile family that mistreated their daughter-in-law, leading to a much more subdued existence. Bob's prospects of finding a new bride in his hometown seemed bleak. I learned all this from a neighbor I had befriended and exchanged phone numbers with. It felt like perfect justice. For me, the divorce felt like a new beginning. I regretted not recognizing the true nature of Bob and his family sooner, but now I had a clear perspective. Perhaps I should have withdrawn immediately when faced with their initial opposition, but I was young and naive. I don't want to disregard the happy moments we shared, so I see the past year as a valuable lesson for my future. I'm relieved to have resolved the situation and moved on.